Hey, welcome back. In this episode, we're going to learn about Azure Application Gateway. My name is Sushant Sutish, and I'm your trainer for this AZ-303 certification course. So, without wasting any more time, let's get into it. What is Application Gateway? Application Gateway manages the request that client application can send to a web app. An Application Gateway routes traffic to a pool of web servers based on the URL of a request. This is known as application layer routing. The pool of web servers can be Azure Virtual Machines, Azure Virtual Machine Scale Set, Azure App Service, or even on premises servers. So, how is an application gateway accept a request? The first step is before a client sends a request to the application gateway, it resolves the domain name of your application gateway by using a DNS server. And Azure controls the DNS entry because all application gateways are in the azure.com domain. And the second step is where Azure DNS returns the IP address to the client, which is the front-end IP address of the application gateway. And the third step is where the application gateway accepts the incoming traffic on one or more listeners. A listener is a logical entity that checks the connection request. It's configured with the front-end IP address, protocol, and port number for connections from client to the application gateway. And the fourth step is if a web application firewall is in use, the application gateway checks the request headers and the body, if present, against WAF rules. And the action determines if the request is a valid request or a security threat. And if the request is valid, it's routed to the backend. And if the request is invalid and WAF is in prevention mode, it blocks as a security threat. And if it is in detection mode, the request is evaluated and logged but still forwarded to the backend server. Now let's look into application gateway components. Application gateway have several components. The main parts of encryption are the front-end port, the listener, and the backend pool. This is an image which shows how incoming traffic from a client to application gateway over SSL is decrypted and then encrypted when it's sent to a server in the backend pool. So what is a front-end port and a listener? So the traffic enters the gateway through the front-end port. You can open many ports and application gateway can receive messages on any of these ports. A listener is the first thing that your traffic meets when entering the gateway through a port. It's set up to listen for a specific host name and a specific port on a specific IP address. And the listener can use an SSL certificate to decrypt the traffic that enters the gateway. And the listener then uses a rule that you define to direct the incoming request to a backend pool. So what is a backend pool? The backend pool contains your application servers. These servers might be virtual machines. Okay, one more time. And these servers might be virtual machines, a virtual machine scale set, or application running on Azure App Service. Incoming requests can be load balanced across servers in this pool. And the backend pool has an HTTP setting that references a certificate used to authenticate the backend servers. The gateway re-encrypts the traffic by using this certificate before sending it to one of your servers in the backend pool. And when the client sends requests to your web app in the IP address or DNS name of the gateway routes these requests to a selected web server in the backend pool, using a set of rules configured for the gateway to determine where the request should go. So there are two primary methods of routing traffic: path-based routing and multiple site hosting. So let me explain you what is path-based routing all about. A path-based routing enables you to send requests with different paths in the URL to a different pool of backend servers. And a multiple site routing enables you to configure more than one web application in the same application gateway instance. And in a multi-site configuration, you register multiple DNS name or IP address of the application gateway, specifying the name of each site. And application gateway uses separate listeners to wait for the request for each site, and each listener passes the request to a different rule, which can route the request to servers in different backend pool. Now let's look at some of the additional features which comes with application gateway. The first one is redirection. Redirection can be used to another site or from HTTP to HTTPS. Second is rewrite HTTP headers. HTTP headers allow the client and server to pass additional information with the request or the response. The third is custom error pages. Application Gateway allows you to create custom error pages instead of displaying default error pages. And you can use your own branding and layout using a custom error page. Now let's look into the Application Gateway configuration. Application Gateway has a series of components that combine to route requests to a pool of web servers and to check the health of these web servers. First component you can configure is the front-end IP address. The client requests are received through a front-end IP address, and you can configure Application Gateway to have a public IP address, a private IP address, or both. And Application Gateway can't have more than one public or one private IP address. Second configuration is through a listener. An Application Gateway uses one or more listeners to receive incoming requests. A listener accepts traffic arriving on a specified combination of protocol, port, host, and IP addresses. Each listener routes requests to a backend pool of servers following routing rules that you specify. A listener can be basic or multi-site. A basic listener only routes a request based on the path in the URL. A multi-site listener can also route requests using the host name element of the URL. Then we have routing rules. A routing rule binds a listener to the backend pools. A rule specifies how to interpret the host name and path elements in the URL of a request and direct the request to the appropriate backend pool. A routing rule also has an associated set of HTTP settings, and these settings indicate whether the traffic is encrypted between the application gateway and the backend servers, and other configuration information such as protocol, session stickiness, connection draining, request timeout period, and health props. The next configuration is the backend pools. A backend pool references a collection of web servers, and you provide the IP address of each web server and the port on which it listens for the request when configuring the pool. Another important setting, which is completely optional, is the web application firewall. So the WAF is an optional component that handles incoming requests before they reach a listener. The web application firewall checks each request for many common threats based on the Open Web Application Security Project. And finally, we have health props. Health props are an important part of assisting the load balancer to determine which servers are available for load balancing in the backend pool. An application gateway uses a health prop to send a request to a server. And if the server returns an HTTP response with the status code between 200 and 399, the server is deemed healthy. And if you don't configure a health prop, the application creates a default probe that waits for 30 seconds and before deciding that a server is unavailable. That concludes this lesson. In the next episode, we're going to look into web application firewall. I will see you on the next one. Until then, take care.